I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. I don't know what it's like for the rest of you lately, but I know that for myself, it's been a little difficult feeling connected to the world, in the sense that I don't really want to be on social media very often. I certainly find myself resistant to spending much time reading the news, let's say, or watching it. And I think for some time I've considered just outright getting rid of all my social media. But what keeps me there are my family and my friends and whatever bit I can do in terms of Dhamma sharing out on the internet. You know, I think of what would happen if all the people who shared Dhamma in the world just all receded away from the internet and there was nothing on there for people to find other than memes and TikTok. So I guess it's good that I'm there, but I find myself dipping in and then leaving for considerable amounts of time. And I come back and see that people have been posting nearly every single day, and I look back at my recent post and it's usually 2 months ago or something. But that's fine. But one of the good things about the little online community that I've cultivated on Facebook and Instagram and things like that is that I do often come across some interesting Buddhist ideas that have been shared by others. And so that's where I'll start today. I came across one particular meme, and you might have seen the format before because it's quite popular. It usually involves like a panel with 2 buttons, and it's usually some sort of dilemma. So you have to push this button or that button, and it's often talking about like cognitive dissonance a lot of the time. So it's having to choose between 2 things that the mind just can't make sense of, and so it has to push one or the other. And the second panel will be this kind of cartoonish, sort of superhero-looking guy. He's clean-shaven. He's got that nice, strong jawline or whatever. And usually the way the meme looks is he's sweating. He's just like, he's got a handkerchief up to his head and he's kind of patting himself, realizing he's got to press one of the 2 buttons and he doesn't know which one to press because they seem to be at odds. Every once in a while you'll look at a different version of the format where the solution is the guy pressing both buttons, and then the second panel is him like thumbs up. And so in this world we live in where everything's memeified, it also happens to Buddhism. And I came across one that was kind of interesting because it has the 2 buttons, and one is lauding the perspective of the Stoics, and the other one the perspective of the hedonists, which is important to clear up at the very beginning, because oftentimes in the West, thanks to the Catholic Church and Christianity at large, hedonism as a philosophy often gets a bad rap. The Epicureans as an example. Like Epicurus was a philosopher who was really concerned about people being happy and being free of stress and pain. Sound a little familiar? But now he gets kind of thrown in there with someone who really enjoys, like, I don't know, a good bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. Epicurean, right? There's even magazines called that. They're all about food. So it's important to clear up what hedonism meant in the ancient world, ancient Greece and Rome. Same thing with Stoicism. So I guess what I'll do is just read the 2 little statements. So I even have the meme on my phone. Nice modern Dharma teacher. So Buddhism, pushing 2 buttons. The first one is Stoicism. Practice self-disciplined detachment and face whatever comes with resolve and courage. Sounds pretty good. Hedonism. Happiness is the highest good, and true happiness is found in freedom from fear and suffering. Also sounds pretty good. And so they're saying here that Buddhism presses both buttons. And we have a modernized version of the superhero guy for Buddhists. He's got his third eye open. He's got his thumbs up, but he's holding a lotus. Real neat. And, if we take those statements as they are, I don't really see anything in conflict there. I can see why Buddhism here is pressing both buttons. I think what happens sometimes is that people read one and go, yep, it's got to be that one. And they read the other and go, oh, it's got to be that one. And they feel like they only get to press one button or the other. There are certain circles of the internet where there are a lot of young men mostly, and young being kind of vague. Men in their teens, early 20s to guys in their 40s and whatever. But often they're usually white, Caucasian, they're young guys practicing Buddhism on their own. They're not going to a temple, they're not practicing in communities. It's just them and whatever translations of the suttas they've got, and they all argue with each other online about what Buddhism really is. And they really like the Stoicism idea, because like Stoic is like manly. Stoicism gets really associated with like the Spartan warriors of ancient Greece, of ancient Sparta. So they imagine themselves being like a champion, like a lion, strong, probably having some good ab situation going on, right? And they're just like, I'm a good, strong Buddhist, where it's all about kind of being miserable and denying my desires and denying this and whatever. And then you have hedonism as it's shared there, which I think often, again, gets a bad rap, because hedonism often gets taken to like a weird place where what it means to be truly happy and to follow pleasure means to gratify the senses. And it's like eating a whole box of chocolates all on your own and then polishing it off with a big can of soda and binge watching whatever the newest thing is on Hulu or whatever. It doesn't matter. And that's not really what hedonism is about. But you have people who kind of follow their bliss in a weird way, then they call that Buddhism too. But if we take the statements as they are, I don't really see the conflict. Stoicism and hedonism, sure. Because the way I would understand it, if I'm saying, okay, I'm going to build a teaching off of this statement, I would say that the Stoicism and hedonism are not equal in that relationship. If we're approaching Buddhism as hedonists, we're approaching it from the standpoint of going after happiness as the highest good. The highest good would be nibbana. And true happiness is found in freedom from fear and suffering, which is a good way of defining what nibbana is, as being unbound, undefined, unlimited, right? Free of suffering, free of stress and pain. And what that means is that we practice in a certain way to achieve that end, that true happiness. And it's a self-disciplined detachment from the things that keep us away from true happiness. And it comes with resolve and courage, qualities like endurance and persistence, which is something we were discussing in the meditation earlier this morning. But I still find issue with the way the meme is set up in the first place. And the reason why I find issue with it is because it's once again a case of Westerners not really knowing how to understand Buddhism other than to try to constrain it in boxes of Western thinking. Because truly, Buddhism is neither Stoic nor hedonist. It's neither one of those philosophies. It stands on its own. The Dharma stands on its own. So this takes us back to something I've been pondering and thinking about since last week. Last week we had an interesting question come up, which is, how do we grasp the Dharma incorrectly? And there are any number of ways to answer this question, because quite honestly, in the history of Buddhism, it's almost a history, as I've been learning it and studying it at the graduate level. It really is a history of misunderstanding. This almost falls into another kind of meme where it's like it's evolving but backwards, right? That kind of has the quality of what's happening in Buddhist history, where you have cases of people practicing the path, and then the path kind of getting muddy, and then someone reforms Buddhism in a way that they think is in accordance with like ancient true Buddhism, and then it gets obscured again and so on. And it's a real kind of sad history of Buddhism, as it just kind of gets pulled and yanked this way and that way into various schools that all want to bicker with each other about which is the right and true way, which is very human, but a bit sad to see when you're looking at the big scope of it. Because I truly do think that the Dhamma is separate from our preferences, from our views, from our normal ways of perceiving the world and defining the world. But oftentimes when we come to Buddhism, we don't know that yet. We tend to come in with whatever we've got, and then we tend to perceive the Dhamma, the Dharma, in that way. So some of the modern ways I think that we can sometimes grasp things inappropriately when it comes to the Dharma is that we come in with sometimes a very materialistic view of the world. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes, this isn't just a Western thing, but I'll focus on the West. Oftentimes in the West, when we come to Buddhism as people who have left religion, and what we absolutely do not want in any way, shape, or form is more religion. And what we get told when we come to Buddhism is like, hey, it's actually not religion. This is science. And some people go, ooh, science, you say? Well, tell me more. And that kind of becomes their door into it. Like, oh, this is science of the mind. This is way better than religion. Because it's kind of a value judgment in which we perceive science and we perceive religion. And so we tend to come with this materialistic view, and that shapes the way we interpret any Buddhist teaching. Oftentimes, the way I've seen it come about is that someone will have a very biochemical view of what it is that we're practicing, say when we meditate. And I can't tell you how many times it's happened, mostly because I've never bothered to count. But someone will come in and want to receive instruction on meditation. I will give instruction, and they'll go, oh, you know what this reminds me of? This cool article I read somewhere. It talks about when you meditate, like this chemical is happening, and there's this part of the brain that's activated, and all this. And I said, cool. Did you perceive any of that while you were meditating? Well, no. Okay, then it's just a cool thing you read, right? But it becomes the way you perceive and conceive the entire path as this thing that's just sort of chemicals in the brain. That alone wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if it helps you want to practice. It's like when I'm practicing meditation, I'm rewriting my brain. Cool. If it gets you to the cushion, good. But it's often the implications that come after that. Someone takes this biochemical way of perceiving it, and then they start to think that Buddhism just is psychology, that it is its own kind of psychotherapy. And just by spending maybe 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, you're just focusing on your breath, and it's going to completely get rid of your depression. It's going to get rid of your anxiety. You no longer need your ADHD medication and so on. And all these, your suicidal ideation and stuff like that, it's all going to just disappear, right? That's usually not the way it goes. I know some people who've been practicing very well, very thoroughly, and they're also still on their meds and talking to their psych, and I don't see that as a bad thing. But when you start thinking of the noble path that we follow, this eightfold path, as biochemical, you might start to think that whatever solutions there are also biochemical. Recently I found out that there's this group of Western Buddhists who call themselves like the psychedelic Sangha or something like that, like whatever name it is they give themselves, but there's some mostly East Coast people, I think, I'm not quite sure, but in any case, their whole thing is they want to practice Buddhism, but they also think it's really cool to practice and meditate while like taking different kinds of psychedelic stuff, mushrooms, ayahuasca, whatever, and who knows what else. So there's probably chemical names for some of these other things they're doing, like ecstasy or whatever, right? And you know, there have always been people in the world who want to experiment with those drugs and try to experience different states and do so in a meditative way. I think the trouble is when they try to say that that's in alignment with the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, and when they try to rewrite history and say that the Buddha was actually teaching that, or that any other number of Dharma teachers in the past, like Vasubandhu, were teaching that, which is kind of what's happening now. There's this pocket, this contingent that started with something different. They didn't start at psychedelics. Maybe some of them did, but some of them started somewhere else. A lot of them started with secular Dharma, secular Buddhism. And it wasn't necessarily the case that these were people who were studying Buddhism and thought, well, you know, I don't really know how I feel about karma and rebirth, and being skeptical of that, because you're completely able to do that and be a part of a more traditional temple. No one's telling you what to believe, right? You can be skeptical about karma and rebirth and still be practicing and still being part of a community. But you have other people that feel so strongly about that, they're so kind of icked out by anything that seems religious, including stuff like karma, that they can't even practice in a room like this. They have to go somewhere else with other people who only think the way they do and only agree with them. and they form a little pocket, a little community, practicing secularly. Ooh, safe. They might not even have a Buddha statue anywhere around, right? Nice, clean room. Usually kind of has the millennial gray pattern going on. And they get to practice that way, and they get to be secular Buddhists together, right? They get to team up that way. But once they start working that way, and they've thrown out stuff like rebirth and karma, they start to wonder what else they might be able to throw out. And they're like, well, we're just practicing this thing that we do to fix our brains, and there's a lot of ways to fix our brains. We don't really need to hold on to these other things that are probably extraneous, probably not all that important to the practice. And they start looking at stuff like precepts, and they start deciding what they can tweeze apart. Like, it gets to even really crazy places where, I remember one time reading an article where someone was trying to make the case for, like, maybe sometimes killing, because, like, what does it mean to kill anyway? And I was like, what do you mean? Everyone knows what it means to kill. It's like, yeah, but like maybe by like not killing someone, you're like killing their time or something. There's a lot of nonsense out there. There's anything out there. If you want to read some dumb stuff, it's all out there on the internet. And so you find people that twist themselves which way, and then they end up twisting the Dharma which way to kind of say whatever they want. And so you have people like this psychedelic Sangha that decide they're going to hold a conference because they want to have a discussion about what it means to practice and what it means to practice on psychedelics. And so they send out feelers to invite people, but they kind of only invite people who already kind of agree with them. They're not willing to have a discussion about what it means to have heightened virtue, have heightened concentration, have heightened discernment. They're just sort of putting it out there to people who already are kind of on their team, which meant that this conference they put together in New York didn't have any monastics, any people from any other country. I think most people, all of them, were either from the United States, maybe people from Europe, practicing different forms of Buddhism, but not really like within any particular lineage. And they just sort of had a conference where they're all just kind of shaking hands and patting themselves on the back. Good job, we did it. We're all taking drugs and doing Dharma, we think, right? And one of the troubling things is that during that conference, there was a particular quote that I saw that more or less said, well, as Buddhists here in America, we've moved beyond the conversation of whether or not these things are compatible or should be done. And now we're having the conversation of how it should be done, right? Meaning that as Buddhists in America, we've already decided that the fifth precept doesn't matter. We can take drugs and meditate, and that's totally cool. Now we just need to make sure we got the dosage right, which really isn't the case, because they made sure that they invited only the right people who already agreed with that premise. And it all started with how they perceived the Dharma, how they view the Dharma, and what they consider to be important about it. What was really troubling is this article that I read that covered this topic was shared online, and people were coming into the comments to show their dismay at this. Like, hey, come on, guys. Like, fifth precept's pretty clear. It's not that intoxicants on their own are bad. It's that they lead to heedlessness. That, it's hard to have a skillful mind and make sure your actions are skillful when you've clouded your mind with all kinds of stuff. Like, come on, it's pretty straightforward. And the author of the article was in the comments fighting with everyone and pointing out and kind of using sort of Buddhist flavored jujitsu, to rhetorically to fight these people who are like, well, look at you. It looks like you're getting pretty worked up and being kind of fundamentalist and reactionary. Not very Buddhist of you. And it's like, yeah, man, but like taking a bunch of mushrooms and meditating doesn't sound very Buddhist either. But in any case, there was just this weird play happening in the comments where the people who were trying to defend the Dharma were framed as these like weird fundamentalists who just weren't cool, man. And it's like, come on. But you see that stuff out there, and it often comes from how we approach the Dharma, how we tend to want the Dharma to conform to our own views, our own perceptions, our own preferences and proclivities. And so it can be in this benign way in which we see a meme where it's like Buddhism, it's both Stoicism and hedonism, right? But it can also be in this really dangerous way where people are being led astray and in a way that the Buddha would have completely disparaged. Because what you do on your own, you're responsible for. That's your own karma, right? You decide to do those things, fine. But the Buddha was actually very, very disparaging on those who encouraged others to break the precepts. What's worse than killing for a Buddhist is encouraging others to kill. Because imagine, You might kill one person, and that's already pretty bad. But if you encourage a whole room full of people to all go out and do it, and now think about how much killing you've done, right? Same thing with stealing, same thing with sexual misconduct, same thing with lying and all forms of unskillful speech, and the same thing with intoxicants, right? There's one teacher I know, and I'm not going to name him because that's not the point, but he's been public about the fact that in his own private life, he's realized he likes to smoke a little marijuana. But he makes sure to point out, he goes, I know that makes me, for lack of a better term, a bad Buddhist. He goes, I'm not encouraging anyone to do what I'm doing, which gets a little murky because then it's sort of like the parent that says like, do what I say, don't do what I do kind of stuff. But at the very least, he has that awareness to realize what I'm doing is actually not good practice. I would never encourage anyone to do it. But he's upfront that like, but yeah, I'm dumb enough to still want to do this. But so much more damaging when people say, but no, this is the Dharma. So as Buddhists in the West, when we're studying Buddhism, I think that it's really important to recognize that we're stepping into something that the Buddha laid out of compassion for us. He really wanted our true and lasting happiness. He wasn't dogmatic in the sense that we often find in other religions, and I will say that Buddhism is a religion. But when I've studied religions, and I feel like I've studied most of the big prominent religions in the world, it seems that religions are often about belief first and practice second, that practice is in service to belief. And what I found in Buddhism is it's actually the other way around. We have practice, and in the sense that we have a goal that we're striving towards. We're striving towards true and lasting happiness, real peace, a real lightened mind and heart, to be free from suffering and pain and stress. And the Buddha compassionately laid out a path that involved right view, right resolve, which are beliefs. But the beliefs are in service to those actions, to that path of action. We don't start with belief and then formulate a practice based off of those beliefs. We have a way of life that we're trying to cultivate, and we realize that certain beliefs are conducive to that path we're cultivating. And so when we look at it that way, these things that we find troubling, like karma, like rebirth, we can start seeing in a different way. One way that I found useful, one way that my teacher would often describe it, is to take on the beliefs provisionally. The way he often says it, and I think I even said this last week, is that you commit to something and then you reflect. So say you're skeptical of karma, you can take on the belief in karma in a provisional sense, in the sense that, okay, I recognize that I'm practicing a path that is one of action. Karma means action. And if I believe that this is a path of action, I believe that it is a path of karma. Karma is not mystical in the sense that you step on a worm and then you're born 10,000 lifetimes as a worm that gets stepped on or whatever. But rather that every action is a cause, and every cause has a consequence. And there are things that we can do in our life that are causal, that are also based on our intentions, and our intentions can be good. And if we have good intentions that are also wise intentions, skillful intentions, then we can expect some good results from that. And we can see that immediately. It's not like we have to start talking about what it would be like in 5, 10, 20 years, or in the next lifetime or the next 50 lifetimes. We can even see that as we're practicing, we can see good results. Earlier I talked about one way we can take the Eightfold Path and break it up into 3. Heightened virtue or skillful conduct, heightened concentration or skillful concentration, heightened discernment or skillful wisdom. And we can see the way that those are mutually supportive. I like to think of them as a tripod, all kind of holding each other up and forming a complete practice. And we can see how putting it into practice, even right now, in this moment, even as I'm talking, we can see benefits that arise in the mind, right? Take the precepts, for example. As we're sitting here together as a community, none of us are killing, or stealing or engaging in any sexual misconduct. None of us are lying right now. None of us are taking intoxicants, leading to a deluded mind, a heedless mind. And so we can reflect on how good it is to live that way. We can sit here and go, all right, I'm not doing anything dumb. I'm not causing myself any stress. I'm sitting here amongst people that are also cultivating in this way. We have a nice community right here today, a nice group of people. And we can take satisfaction in that, delight in that. And when we take delight in being in good company, all cultivating together, right, we can just go, okay. And that in itself is already a sign, a little seed of the unburdening of your heart that you're doing by cultivating this path, right? And it might not sound like much, especially if you're expecting to be like levitating and having that third eye and all sorts of cosmic stuff happening. You know, it can seem really small and tiny that you can just have a good moment. But good moments are the steps along the path, you know. I remember reading another meme. I think I read too many memes, but it was a shared quote of, you know, saying that like 1,000 pounds is really hard to carry. If you had to lift 1,000 pounds right now, you probably couldn't do it, right? Not probably, you couldn't do it. But lifting 1 pound every day, you could eventually move that 1,000 pounds, right? That's the idea. There's other ways of saying it. I don't think I said it very well today, but the idea being that this path that we develop is a gradual one. That these skillful moments that we cultivate, these nice, still, quiet moments that we have together, that is the path. You're walking it right now. It's not theoretical. It's not some indifferent, cold philosophy, right? This path we walk is your life. You're walking it. You're developing the path right now, right? The Eightfold Path is manifest right now. We're in the presence of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. We're in the presence of admirable friends, Kalyanamitta. We are being skillful in our conduct. We are building up our discernment and concentration right now. It's not theoretical. Always try to remember that this path is your life. You are living it. It is immediate, intimate, present at all times. And when we view it that way, we see that the Dhamma is always around us in every moment. So with that kind of open understanding of the Dhamma, we might find that we're able to live in a way that we don't limit the Dhamma or constrain it by trying to define it too narrowly as one particular thing. Is it Stoic? Is it Epicurean? Is it hedonistic? Is it existential or whatever? Whatever terms we want to apply. The Dhamma itself is life, and it's a life that's lived skillfully, which means it's lived with wise intention. Intention for your true and lasting happiness, not just for yourself, but for others, everyone around you. So I think that's what I got today. Something to reflect on. That the Dhamma well lived is a life well lived. So I'll end my thoughts with that. Thank you.